My name is Louis Victor Waddle, and today we celebrate the life of one of the most amazing people I will ever know, my dad, John Frederick Waddle. John was born at home on July 1st, 1927 in rural southern Kentucky. His mother said that it was the hottest day of her life. He was the fifth child in 5 years. They lived in the country, although his father worked in town at a bank. There was no indoor plumbing. Eventually, they got a pump in the kitchen so they wouldn't have to cart water from a creek all the time. When he was 12, they moved into town. He was a smart kid, a good kid, just as he eventually grew into a smart man and a good man. His parents didn't want their children to play sports, but John loved basketball, and he'd sneak out to play every now and again. Because most of the young men were off to war, he began to work at the local department store when he was 14 years old, the beginning of a long career in retailing. World War II was still going on when he graduated from school, and John had to go into the service. He originally wanted to join the Army Air Corps, but he failed the physical when they discovered that his vision wasn't that great. So eventually he got glasses and joined the Navy instead. But before he was out of training, the war was already over. But he stayed on to help close down the base in upstate New York rather than take early release, mostly because he very badly wanted to go to college. And like so many others in his generation, the GI Bill changed the path of his life. So he showed up at the University of Kentucky, along with thousands of other veterans, in the fall of 1946. He rushed through college in 3 years before his GI Bill money ran out. When he got out of school, Dad got a job at the local Sears store in Lexington. He worked there for about a year, and then he applied and was also accepted at the only graduate school offering a major in retailing at the time, New York University. He lived in Greenwich Village and attended NYU from 1950 to 1952. When he graduated, his former boss at the Sears store lobbied very hard with Sears headquarters to hire him. He then began a long career with Sears. At first, he was back and forth between New York and Chicago, doing such jobs as women's coat buyer and manager of the jewelry department. In 1959, the chairman of Sears sent John to Hong Kong to open up some buying offices. He had to take a prop plane which island hop across the Pacific to Hong Kong, where he was one of only a handful of Americans, many of the others being Christian missionaries. Sears kept a large amount of money in a bank in Tokyo, just in case John needed to be ransomed. See, the communists had only recently taken control of the Chinese mainland at the time, and the British colony of Hong Kong was considered very dangerous. He worked very hard setting up an office and making contacts with manufacturers in Hong Kong, Japan, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. When he returned to Chicago in 1961, he left behind a bustling operation, and his Kentucky accent was completely gone, replaced with a vaguely British accent. Over the next few years, Dad became something of a go-to guy for overseas assignments. He traveled to places like Spain, Australia, Germany, and Belgium, where the European Union mistakenly thought he was British and let him see all their data. From 1969 to 1972, John was a national manager of the toy department, and you can imagine how much fun he had with that. At Christmas time, he would make the media rounds showing off Sears' new Barbies, Etch-a-Sketches, and hula hoops. From 1972 to 1976, he was assistant to the senior vice president of merchandising. He came to use some available space in the corporate planning department, which is where he met his wife.
I first met John when he came to interview with the vice president of corporate planning. He was going to come to work in that department, and I shared an office with the vice president's secretary, personal assistant it is now, but she was a secretary then. We had a lot of people come and sit in that chair and wait to talk to the vice president, and he just was amazing. He talked about the weather, which is what most people talk about, but it being John, there was discussion of woolly worms and the length of worms in general. I don't remember what it all was. The upshot was it was supposed to be a rough winter, and this was his determination. He was so relaxed and so unusual. I was just fascinated, I have to admit. And it was during those 6 months that he worked in corporate planning that we fell in love.
In 1977, Dad was made Sears' national merchandise manager for the children's category, which included clothing, bedding, and toys. And on June 3rd, 1977, he was married to Catherine Osborne in a small ceremony at her parents' home in Franklin Park. John was 49 years old.
I eventually went to another department and we began to see each other. We didn't date for too long, I must admit. I think we went out for the first time in January and we were married the following June. Early in February at some point, we were at his apartment. We'd had lunch and something fell on the ground. He bent over and he picked it up and he looked up at me and he said, he says, while I'm down here, and he proceeded to ask me to marry him, which I wasn't really surprised. We were already talking about it.
During the next 3 years, they had 3 children. Me, Louis Victor, born April 22nd, 1978, Joan Catherine, born May 20th, 1979, and John Frederick Jr., also known as Jack, born August 11th, 1980. In 1978, Dad became vice president of the children's department at Sears. Being made an officer was one of his lifelong goals. His wife also really appreciated his career, as she was trapped at home with one more child than she had hands for, and the sample room at Sears had many necessary supplies. His briefcase often contained boys' belts, girls' frilly dresses, or a package of socks. UPS delivered the disposable diapers to the door. He was given his dream job in 1982 when he was named Executive Vice President of Sears World Trade. But the dream turned sour when an outsider was brought in over his head. He worked to get his loyal workers in good places, and then he worked to get World Trade back on good footing, and then he happily retired in 1985.
Recently, I was going through some things at the house, and I found a book that was given to my dad when he retired from Sears. It had a bunch of letters written from the people he worked with. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I can get to find out the kind of guy Dad was at work, because there's no way that this perfect gentleman with all these incredible stories and just the nicest guy anyone could imagine is actually, was this way at work. There's no way he climbed that ladder as far as he did, being nice and being a perfect gentleman. So I was like, oh, this is going to be cool, some insight into who Dad was at work. And so I'm reading all these letters, and all they talk about was all the stories John used to tell at work, and how he's the perfect gentleman. I guess the Dad that we knew, is the same person he was his whole life. That was just the way he was wired. That was the way God made him. He was this, the perfect Kentucky gentleman.
John began his new career as a stay-at-home dad, way before it was fashionable. At the time, his children were 5, 6, and 7 years old, and he was 58. Dad made breakfast for us and packed our school lunches every morning, and when we returned home from school, he had snacks ready for us. He went to Parents' Day at school, pitched t-ball practice, where he once got hit in the nose by a ball, but he went on pitching. He went trick-or-treating, and even played Santa Claus during the holiday season.
I think the one thing I'll remember most about Dad is just that he was always there and always present. And, when I get up in the morning, I would know that he was always downstairs in his chair, reading the paper, reading a book. He always offered to help make breakfast. Even when I was in junior high and high school, he would have happily made my breakfast every morning. And then he was always there when I got home from school. He was present. And being a parent, I know how important that is. And it makes me want to provide that for my kids, because I think it does really help your child's confidence, and it just was something that was a comfort for me growing up. When we got home from school, he was, there to make us a snack and to help with our homework, and that was just something that always is in the front of my mind when I think about my dad.
He and Mom both loved to travel and felt it was important and broadening to show the world to us, their children. There were many trips to Kentucky to visit with his family, and other family vacations included trips to London, Hawaii, and the semi-annual visit to Disney World in Orlando, Florida. As time passed, and we all grew up and went off to college, it was time for another change. Dad had never really liked the Chicago winters, and after a bad fall in the ice, which led to knee surgery, he was ready to go somewhere warmer for the winters. In 1999, he and his wife purchased a home in Green Valley, Arizona. Much to his delight, John's family began to grow again. Joan was teaching in Phoenix and met and fell in love with Leon Earls. They were married on June 12, 2004. In 2006, they had a beautiful daughter and named her Catherine Joan. And in 2009, they had a handsome son and named him Andrew Scott. John had always loved children and was thrilled with his grandchildren. But by 2007, the disease that would take his life was becoming pretty apparent. His memory was starting to fade. Slowly over the next 5 years, his mind had slipped away. Fortunately, he stayed the same kind and gentlemanly person he always was, and he always recognized his children and wife, even when he forgot his own name. On September 11, 2012, after a short battle with pneumonia and heart problems, he passed away in hospice care in Tucson, Arizona, surrounded by his wife and children, just as he would have wanted.
You know, what I remember most about him was just the good, kind, calm presence. And I think maybe one of the most surprising parts of his personality was he was an adventurer.
Just an incredible storyteller, and he lived an incredible life. Loved sharing those stories, obviously with his coworkers. He loved sharing those stories with his family. He loved sharing those stories with our friends, sometimes to our embarrassment. He loved telling those stories, and really he had some amazing ones to tell.
I think a lesson I learned from Dad is just that I don't always need to be the center of attention. I don't always need to be the loudest person in the room. Dad was an observer, and I find myself that I'm an observer as well, and kind, and I try to be those things as well, and I know that I get that from Dad, and just from observing and watching and growing up with him. And just manners are very important to me, and being nice to everyone. I remember thinking anytime someone would ask Dad at church or wherever we were, how are you? And Dad would always say, oh, fine, thank you. That's just something that I try to do too, to just always say thank you. Even though it's something little, I think it is important.
He was very, very good at finding ways to get things done. You didn't need to go straight ahead and butt your head against a wall, which was really a lesson for me. Was one of the biggest things he taught me. There are so many different ways to do things without being confrontational or rude. He was a genius at it. There were times where I would just be at my wit's end. And he would calm me down, and we'd talk about it for a few minutes, and I think to myself, well, what was I so upset about? This all seems very easy now.
I think one of the life lessons that I take away from Dad that has kind of influenced the person I am now as an adult was he was a big man, and he could have thrown his weight around if he wanted to, but that was never his first approach to dealing with people. He always asked nicely. I could probably count on one hand the number of times that I heard him get angry and on the telephone with whoever it was, an airline or a hotel or whatever it was, that, he could have stomped his feet and gotten angry. And especially in a society is today where people are so confrontational. That was never Dad's first resort, or his second or third. The handful of times that I actually heard him get angry was, when being nice multiple times just didn't work. And that seems so contrary to the way most people treat other people nowadays. And of course, Dad always had incredible respect and love and treated us, his family, and his friends well. But he always treated strangers with that same respect and kindness. There's just not enough of that around today.
The fact that a man who was born in a small town in southern Kentucky, not even in the town, outside the town, lived without running water for the first 12 years of his life, could travel all over the world and become an important executive in the largest retailer in the world at the time. They should have let him run that place. It would still be the largest retailer in the world.
I think he considered himself as lucky as I consider myself for having him there. I can't imagine a better childhood than the one that he was able to provide for us.
I never doubted that Dad was proud of me and supported my choices and was just a great encourager all along the way.
I think the thing that he would most like to be remembered as the founder of this family. The fact that he never had a family until he was 50. The fact that he never knew if he ever would have a family. He loved our children. He loved our grandchildren. He was constantly amazed that he got that opportunity.